In the summer of '68, I was 23 and already a career criminal with an arrest record dating back to high school. But I was still a rookie outfielder with the Colombo family. A few years would pass before I earned my mob name, Sally Ubats, Crazy Sally. Ubats is Brooklynese for upazzo, crazy in Italian. How I got it is a wild story I'll get to later. But back then, if Dominic or anybody else told me that this guy Johnny Boy, a low-level Gambino with a Capone fixation, would one day not only become boss of that family and the most powerful mafia leader in the country, but would also rewrite the history of the mob and become world famous in the process, I would have thought they were the ones who were a pazzo. I would have known for sure if anybody had predicted that when Johnny Boy skyrocketed to power and flamed out in equally spectacular fashion, I would have a front row seat, and that he and I would be bound together in a personal drama, one that began the day he got out of prison in 1972 and didn't end until 30 years later, when he was back in stir for life, but where he met an early death instead. I got to know John Gotti 4 years after that night at the Flame. That's when he started hanging out at the Sinatra Club, the new gambling joint in Ozone Park I owned with the Cataldos, Dominic and his little brother Joey. John and I spent a lot of time together because we both had a big-time Jones for gambling. Even though he loved playing cards, he was a lousy poker player and he hardly ever hit a winner at the track, but he was great at board games. John and me and Foxy Girardi, a young guy who'd been with John since he was a kid and who became my best friend and crime partner, used to spend hours playing at my club and at the Gambino's own place nearby, the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. We played marathon games of Scrabble and Monopoly. We bet on those games, and John won a lot of them. He was pretty good at chess, too. Once we got to know each other, Johnny and I hung out together outside my club and our other regular haunts. We went to the track, we went to ball games and barbecues, we played softball at his crew's annual picnics. When our kids got older, they played on the same Pop Warner football teams. Despite the fact that Johnny and I were with different families, we planned scores together. That's something that would never have happened in the old days, but thanks in part to the Sinatra Club, the strict lines between mob families were beginning to blur. The club was a place where guys from all the different families hung out together regularly. Another thing that the bosses never would have allowed just a few years earlier. John and I talked a lot about the mob and how it was in the old days and how things were changing. He grew up in the same neighborhood where I was born, in East New York, Brooklyn. That's where John's heroes Al Capone and Albert Anastasia were from, and where the Murder Incorporated headquarters, Midnight Rose's candy store, was. John loved all the stories about the mob in those days, and I was full of them thanks to my Uncle Tony. Uncle Tony was an old-school gangster who came up under Joe Profaci, and he raised me on his stories about what it was like running booze during Prohibition, and how guys like Profaci and Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello, and before all of them, Arnold Rothstein, the guy who fixed the World Series, ruled New York and lived like kings.